One thing I learned while I was living in Berkeley, California in the late 60s and early 70s is that communism doesn't work. Today, people are saying communism does work, but it didn't really work that well with Joseph Stalin or Mao Zedong or Fidel Castro or whatever. But we have a new system of communism that really does work. Well, the question is, has it ever worked? And what is the end of communism? And how is communism today related to the progressive movement or the socialist movement or the radical socialist movement? We're going to find out today in this next segment.
Over the past several decades, especially during this past administration prior to the Trump administration, we have seen the progressives stand up with a voice.
This is what democracy looks like!
You know, the progressives want to make us dependent upon government. They literally have come into our inner cities and targeted churches, making EBT cards and free cell phones and dependency back upon government again.
Well, the whole issue today is one of definitions, and it covers a whole panoply of things. You know, a lot of people will say, well, I'm a progressive, but most people don't even know what that means. They think that means liberal or forward-looking. In reality, a progressive is regressive because they are neo-Marxists. The early progressives in the early part of the 20th century believed that Marxism was a great thing. They were in love with what Stalin was doing in the Soviet Union. And it wasn't until they discovered the horrible damage and the deaths he'd caused that they stopped that and they wrapped themselves in the American flag and began calling it patriotism or liberalism. And it was over time that, first of all, parties like the Democratic Party were hijacked by progressivism, and now a very substantial part of the Republican Party. But again, remember, it all rests on the whole idea of definitions. And the definitions tend to shift and change. So progressives will say, well, we care about women's rights. Well, they really don't. They only care about left-wing women's rights. Other women might have a difference of opinion they don't care about. They don't care about, say, for example, when it comes time to look at what's happening to women inside many Islamic countries. They don't care. As a matter of fact, they begin jumping up and down and yelling Islamophobe when you point out what if Christians were doing it in other countries, they would be thundering condemnation of it. And so the problem is we're standing on a pitching deck today of conflicting ideas, self-contradicting ideas that are constantly changing. And then they demand that we follow their ideas at every step. This isn't livable. A society can't exist on these things. And we have to recognize them for what they are and not allow them to set the terms of the debate. It's really important to understand that the early progressives, people such as John Dewey, who founded the public education system, John Dewey actually went over to the Soviet Union to see how it was the Marxists were brainwashing their own children. And then he brought that back here and began establishing that here in the United States. And so people talk about being progressive, but in reality they're being socialist. And socialism fails. It's failed every time it's ever been tried. It results when in its serious forms, like in the former Soviet Union or in China, it has resulted in the deaths of millions, not just thousands, but millions of people that have died, well over 100 to 130 million people, and yet we keep trying it over and over and over again. It just doesn't work, but they're not willing to admit that. And so instead of being, say, Marxist, now we use the word socialist. Well, a Marxist is just a socialist in a hurry with a gun. That's the only difference. The philosophy is pretty much the same. And it doesn't work. It didn't work in Venezuela. It hasn't worked anywhere. And the only time it can actually stay afloat is when you're dealing with a vibrant capitalism, which the progressives absolutely hate. A vibrant capitalism to feed the money into the failing socialism to keep it afloat. But once the money runs out, that's it. Everything implodes. It results in social immorality and disaster. And why we keep chasing this, I don't know, but it sounds good. It keeps selling. The most important thing you can do right now, people think that just teaching the Bible is enough. It's not. You have to organize that Bible in such a way that people can understand how it stands against the worldview of today. Teach your children how to reason, how to think on their feet. Teach them traditional forms of logic. And let them understand what the competing worldviews are today and why we think Christianity is much better than that. You also have to teach them what the cost of this is, because if the worldview of a particular institution or a place where you work goes in a different direction, you can be penalized from that. You can be fired. You can be dropped from your job. There will be a cost to being a Christian in the future, and we have to train our kids what that is all like to exist in a post-Christian era in Western society today. If you don't do that, you're really neglecting the command of God, who said, raise up a child the way he should go. He didn't say give him to somebody who's a secular atheist and let them teach them the way they should go in their belief system.
It's so crucial that this next generation find its voice. In the Word of God, Amos 8:11 says there's a famine in the land of the Word of God, not of food and water, but of the Word of God. It is essential that we as Americans return to the very bedrock foundation, the fabric that this nation was founded upon, by reinserting the Word of God into our national dialogue.